You're listening to Chem Stories, a podcast series created by people with lived experience of PnP chemsex.
Hey Squirrel friends, this is Captain Patrice speaking from the flight deck of Chem Stories Airlines. We're now about halfway through our YUL Solidarity flight, where investigator Olivier resumes the conversation with Éric. Our flight plan forecasts discussions on the Montreal's PnP community, exploring chemsex scenes, community-led harm reduction and activism, and destigmatization through shared stories. Should you experience turbulence while listening to this podcast, please visit our list of resources and services related to PnP chemsex in the episode description and on chemstories.ca. Thank you for choosing Chem Stories Airlines, where the journey is always a trip.
You know, I want to talk a bit about Montreal, because that's where you are. That's where you had your experience with chemsex. What's the chemsex scene in Montreal? Is there any things that you think differentiate chemsex in Montreal than in other cities like Toronto or New York? Or
it's difficult because I think, of course, the difference in Montreal, like with other Canadian cities, for example, I think Montreal is very progressive. It's a big city, so of course it's always, I think, easier in big cities to have access to drugs and to have kind of connections. And so people are using chemsex also are doing chemsex in small towns and everywhere. But of course, there's a concentration of chemsex user in the cities, which kind of makes community a bit different. From other cities in the world, what I saw is that for me, chemsex was easy in Montreal because of the places we can have sex. For me, like, of course, there's all the online community, so you can meet people online and go to people's house and have chemsex. But the bathhouses, the scene is very present in Montreal, it's open 24/7, which is not the case, for example, in many bathhouses in Europe. Like normally they close, and closing is not a thing that chemsex user like. we don't stop, so so a place that closes doesn't work with our schedule. So it doesn't work with the way we see time and the way time kind of extend and so I think these places really kind of helped people like chemsex user to kind of connect and meet each other. For me, that was the case a lot. I was going a lot in bathhouses. But this is the case in also other cities like Toronto, so where these bathhouses are also open 24/7. So I think Toronto and Montreal, I don't think there's a huge differences, for example, between those two Canadian cities. I think there's a difference between those big cities and smaller cities in Canada, where maybe the scene is not that big. And I think it will be more like online meetings in those spaces. And I think more and more now, and especially after the pandemic, the online way of meeting people to have chemsex, it really has boomed a lot, I think. And this is universal. But I think, and the other thing maybe I would say about the Montreal scene, for me, the good thing I think in Montreal is that since we're very progressive, I think we have an open-mindedness around drugs that is really present. I think maybe it's the French vibe of it. I think we have kind of a Latin way of maybe tolerance and openness to substance use. Of course, when you're talking about crystal meth, this openness kind of goes down in people's opinion. I want to say that, but still. So, and there's a lot of research done on this. There's community groups. So there's kind of a diverse community net, I would say, around those issues that is starting to get bigger. But I think if we compare to other cities like Toronto, for example, I think we still have a lot of work to do to address the situation and help the community in terms of community organization and the way chemsex response is financed and organized. I think it's still not enough. And I think there's a lot to be done. I'm still amazed that there is no, for example, provincial or federal plan to address chemsex in public health, like nothing. I'm still amazed by that. I'm still amazed by the fact that in Montreal, you don't have an organization dedicated to chemsex help. Like, I mean, you have you have Réseau, for example, who's helping gay and bisexual and queer men. And they're going to do things around chemsex, but this is not their only thing they do. I mean, and I think this would be really important that there's a place really for that. And maybe the other difference I see is that in Montreal, a lot of people speak French, which I think in the recovery scene can bring some challenges because, for example, the 12-step culture in the Anglophone world is very predominant. It's very important. Groups like Crystal Meth Anonymous, they have English meeting all around the world on Zoom at every hour of day and night. And there's a big community of people recovering from crystal meth use in the Anglophone world. And since we're really smaller and Francophone, it's really less developed. So there's, for example, CMA meetings in French in Montreal, but it's really smaller. There's not so many meetings. So it's still doing a great. And also, I always say, like, CMA was there before everyone else, and they've been there all the time. So people can love or not the 12-step meetings, and this is not like this is everyone's opinion is good, but it's there and it's still there. So this is the good thing, because in Montreal, what I think for me, and now I'm being a bit like angry and political, but the thing I don't like is that, at the exception of group like CMA, all the different initiatives around chemsex always have stopped or have been limited by specific funding that was for a project. And then we have someone, for example, there was a person working with chemsex in L'Actuel, the clinic, but they stopped to finance it, and then it stopped because it's always like project of 1 year or 2 years. And so Réseau is having now for a big period of time, they're doing groups. Like now it's kind of there, and it's been there for a while. CRDM is also doing a group, but these initiatives are sometimes really popping up and then not coming back. And I'm like, if you really want to address this, and if you really want to help people, you have to be there on the long term. It takes a lot of time to recover from chemsex and crystal meth use. You will probably need help for a few years. And if those programs and projects and people are changing also, you have someone working with you at the clinic, and then a year later, this person, is not there anymore, and there's no program. What do you do? So I think there's so that's why I say, where's the strategy? Where's the kind of the safety net that we can always go to? I have to remind people that, like, CMA is great, but it's not finance. It's just volunteers, people volunteering together, and it's addict helping other addicts. So it's great, but we need more than that. And I think Montreal, I think the government in place need to do really much more to address this issue. And I think, of course, it's a queer issue regarding drug use and queer people. So of course, we know how it is. We know it's not the priority. We know it's taboo. We know people don't want to talk about that. But at some point, I think we're going to need to talk about it way more than what we do now.
Yeah. And I think that's part of, like, what we're trying to achieve with this podcast. Is not, obviously, I'm not claiming this podcast will change everything and we'll have a strategy because of it. But, it is one way to kind of put this issue, at the forefront, having discussion about it. And I think if it remains silenced and taboo, we're not going to move forward with having more services, whether they're like services for people that are in recovery or that want to stop or reduce, or people that, want to just need support for, having more, to implement more harm reduction practices.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's really important. I think it's like I said, storytelling is the base of it, but I am becoming impatient about, like, we have been saying it a lot, and we are saying it, and we are telling it to you. And at some point I'm like, come on. And there's been so many studies, and there's been so many like, we know that there's a problem. And sometimes I'm like, okay, we do studies, and then there's recommendations, and then what? We need action. So I'm totally in for that. But I think the governments and the people in place have to be accountable of, like, what they're financing. A lot of organizations working on this, doing the peer support group. They're financing studies. And these studies are telling them, and these projects like Chem Stories are telling them a reality that needs addressing, and then they have to follow up with that. I think that's very important.
So, so in the context of Chem Stories, like we came to you so that we can learn through you, but also not just through you, but as you being a host and having discussion with other people that our listeners will have a chance to listen to. So far you've recorded like 2 panel discussions. So you're gonna do 3 total in the context of the podcast. Do you want to tell us a bit about the themes that that those panel discussion are on?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, when you offered me that, it was really a great opportunity because I also worked on the advisory board of Chem Stories, so we kind of all together with you and with other people, we kind of tried to think about what Chem Stories could be, what the English version of the podcast could be, and I think it was unanimous that we wanted to have people talking together about their shared experience and tackling like some really important subject about it. 3 for me came in mind really fast for me. So the first one that I wanted to talk about, of course, was how can art can tackle and talk about chemsex in a different way, and how are artists using their chemsex experience in their artwork. So so we did like a panel around with 2 artists, like with Mikiki and Gabriel, who are 2 amazing artists. So, and this was really great for me also to be able to share the different ways that artists use their experience through their work, sometimes in a very blunt way, sometimes in a more subtle way, and but all the time what I saw was really that it was so helpful. And I think the way art can help people through their chemsex journey is really amazing. So I don't want to say too much about that because we have a whole table on that, but this was the first one, so it was very important for me. Like, of course, as an artist, it was obvious that I wanted to go there and talk to other artists. And then we did another table around, which is the other, I would say, the other kind of part of my life. Like, I'm an artist, but I'm also really involved in my community, and so we did a table around with 2, Hugues and Jean-Sébastien, who are really huge community advocates around queer life and chemsex. And of course, we say I'm the host, but it was those 2, especially this one. I mean, those, like, everyone could have been the host of this conversation because it's people that have so much experience about this community work. So it was really great to have those person at the table. Because for me, I talked about it already, but I'm really impatient and hungry for an organized community response to what's happening. I think this is really lacking. And I want to talk to my community and say, listen, what's happening around chemsex says something about us. And there's an opportunity here for us to become better at having empathy for others, helping people in our community struggling, having better connection, better sex life together. How do we have sex together? How do we treat each other? What about consent? What about our health? What about many things that for me are popping out often in the gay community, but now we have an opportunity, I think, to do better. And I wanted to talk with those people about how our community response tells a lot about us and how we can maybe do better. So this is the 2 we already done, but then we have a third one that we're going to do with the theme of gender diversity and chemsex. And I think it's very telling to say that it's the last one we have to do because we're struggling to find people who want to talk publicly about that. So we're struggling to find trans people, gender diverse people that are using chemsex and that want to talk about it. So yeah, I was talking with Patrice, who's working with us on the podcast, and he was telling me that he's thinking that the reason why is probably because of the double discrimination people are afraid of. We live in a world, especially right now, where it's so difficult to be trans or gender diverse. There's so much discrimination. And then if you add on top of that the discrimination around drug use and especially crystal meth, what we get from feedback is they want to talk about it. They feel like they would want to do it, but then they're maybe scared. And I understand why. or maybe they don't feel secure enough, or maybe they feel like they're too fragile to do this. And I completely understand, because I think it's a very vulnerable part of our community. Like, these are really vulnerable people. And so I think it's always difficult to talk out loud about these issues. So we are planning it. So we already found one person and we're gonna do it. But then it's so important for me because it's not because we don't hear those people that they don't do it and that they're not part of the chemsex community. We know like a lot of people are doing it, and this is why it was so important for me that at least in the Chem Stories version, the English version of the podcast, we had a few people from the gender diversity that are going to talk about the reality about that, because it's very specific, it's very different, and it's very important for me that we can also hear those stories. I think that's the goal of Chem Stories, is to hear this kind of diversity of stories. So for me, it was, being an non-binary person, it was very important for me, because also I have to say that my gender journey is closely connected to my chemsex journey. I discovered through recovery that I was non-binary, and I realized after, like in my recovery, that actually using for me was a way to be freed from the gender standard of the gay community that are very difficult sometimes to tackle. I was always feeling inadequate, not manly enough, and so when I was using, then it was one or the other, or I was able to believe that I was this man in my fantasy. I was able to kind of fantasize that actually, okay, I was perfect, I was okay, I was this kind of super sex bomb I thought I needed to be. And at the same time, I was sometimes in a world where people didn't care that much about those things. So I could be freed from that. And so through recovery, I discovered actually that I was a slave of these representation of men and women in our community. And I discovered I was not a man. that was the problem I was facing. And so I know that there's a lot of other people there dealing with this and experiencing sometimes transition while they're doing chemsex. And I know how this can be difficult. So I really want to hear those stories. So we're working hard now to be able to have this discussion soon.
I think, what you're saying, it's so powerful. And I think I'm trying to put myself, I do not have lived experience of chemsex, but say I did. Would I talk openly about it? And I think it would take a lot of courage. And I don't know if I would be able to, although, I'm on this podcast talking about this subject, but, I understand that there's, I think it takes a lot of courage, and I understand people being reluctant, considering that we still live in a society that has like a very negative view of drug use. Chemsex has been highly sensationalized and highly stigmatized. And I think there's a lot of judgment in the gay and the queer community still around chemsex. I think we're open about sex and drugs, but there's limits to people. Like, people say, oh yeah, I do drugs, but not crystal meth. And people are very quick to say that. And so I think, when I hear people like you and others sharing so candidly and so openly your stories, I think it takes a lot of courage. And, and I think it's a privilege for me to hear those stories, and hopefully, people that are listening to this podcast will also appreciate, the effort and courage of putting yourself out there with this topic.
Yeah, because you really can have something to lose. I mean, some people can, if you have a job, if you have your family, you can have like, so it's, I was lucky enough because I'm in the art field. So, actually it's not like I didn't have an employer. So for me, you talk about courage, but for me, it was more obvious than I think for other people. And for other people, I completely understand that they don't want to go public about this. But even though in the podcast we offer to people to change their voice and they don't have to disclose publicly who they are, because it's one thing. Of course, talking publicly is difficult, but even though just sharing to another person or to yourself what you're going through is difficult, because we also often forget that. I was telling earlier that chemsex arrives in a context, which is sometimes very complicated, which sometimes is surrounded by trauma, by really difficult experience. So that lead to chemsex or that happen during chemsex. A lot of people that are doing chemsex are experiencing sometimes issues with consent, with sexual assault, with health problems regarding their use. Revisit all that, or revisit what leads you to chemsex, which can be also complicated. It's not easy. Even though you're not making it public and people don't identify you, just sharing that with another human being or with yourself can be for me. I think it can be really helpful. I think it can be really, really important, and for a lot of people, it's great. But you have to be ready to do that. And I really think it's great that people say no also, and that say no for the moment. I'm not ready. I think this is the best decision you can make. So I'm not saying like people should all share. I mean, no, people should share if they want to do it and if they're ready to. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes what you need is share in another context, and maybe go see a specialist, a social worker. So there's many ways you can share your story, and you can look for someone to talk about what
Mm-hmm.
you're going through.
I think going back to the French podcast that we mentioned, I think one of the great things that for me, I think we've achieved is that the number of people like health professionals or people working in addiction who told me they listened to the podcast and got a completely new perspective on chemsex, and that changed the way they interact now with individuals who come and mention they have chemsex experience. I think just that, I think is so powerful. So, we can see that sharing experience is a great way to break taboos and kind of getting people to be a bit more compassionate and lessen the kind of like panic mode, oh my God, chemsex, because, it's a bit how it has felt for a long time in the community that we were like in a panic around this topic. And not that there's not an urgency, and we talk about it, to act and to have better funding and do things, to support the community. But at the same time, if we're in a panic mode, we're not going to have a response that really take into account the complexity of what it is.
Yeah, I think every response based on fear is not a good response. I totally agree with you. But a response based on indignation can be good. I think, like for me, it's not about fear, but the true thing is I've lost people. I went to funerals of people I knew from the chemsex scene. I've lost people that have died or just disappeared, and I've seen people that I was using with, for example, 10 years ago, and I see them on the streets now, homeless, struggling with mental health. And I think I say that a lot because I know that in the community, there is a lot of people that are talking about risk reduction and helping people to have a safer way to use drugs. And I think it's very important. But I think it's also important, and not to be scared, but just to say what's happening. And that, yes, also chemsex is ruining people's life. Not all people, but a lot of people using chemsex are developing really serious problems, and they're not happy and they're not doing well. So I think both have to be there. So it's not about being scared of it, but it's just telling the truth. So I think there is this, and there is also, before we get there with chemsex, we go to chemsex at the beginning. Why? We don't go to chemsex because we want to have psychosis and end up at the hospital. This is not the reason we go there. We go there because we want connection, pleasure, and we want to deal with traumas we have. And the reason why people go and have chemsex and still do it is because it works. At the beginning, they get what they want. The problem is sometimes they develop problems that, and then they end up with bigger problems than they have at the beginning. But then we have to address also, the question of pleasure, of fun, of connection, and why is our community unable to provide that outside chemsex? Why do we have to? Why is it the way we have to get it? So it's a very complex question, and that boils down to the more diverse we have of the voices talking about this, the better it is, and also because it's such a specific world for outside people who don't know a lot about chemsex and never experience it. It's very specific. It's very different. It's hard to understand. It's not simple. So I think that's why we need to talk a lot about it in many different ways so that people from outside can understand really what's going on, because it's complex.
What is the one thing you hope people will take away by listening to our podcast, like Chem Stories, like not just today, but the whole series? One thing.
And this is difficult.
If there was one thing.
Yeah. I mean, the first word that comes, and it's maybe cliche, but it's compassion. Because I think with compassion and empathy, all the rest comes with it. So if you don't have that, then you don't have anything else. You cannot do anything. So I think this is the first thing. And I think identification. Yeah, if people can hear in what people are sharing a kind of something that resonates with them, and so that they can connect to, oh, this person who have chemsex experience, I relate to this person, even though I'm not, for example, a chemsex user. I can connect, so I can understand what this person is going through. Or if I'm a chemsex user, then I connect with this person, and then I see myself, and then I maybe have another insight on what I can do or how I can handle my using. So I think compassion, empathy, that would be the first two words that come in mind for me.
That would be a very good start.
Yeah.
We can just get more compassion, and
in
our community in general.
Yeah, and maybe I would add action, because I said that a lot.
Yes.
I would like a lot that those podcasts and also the community that the podcast is fostering and creating, because we're creating links also. Like, as a host, I connected with, for the moment, 4 different person on 2 different conversations. We're gonna have 2 more, and so we're connecting people from Montreal, Toronto, Halifax, and so I think this is a way to organize actions also in the community. So I think this is also a really great thing about those podcasts.
Yeah, fostering a community. A lot of people are voicing their concerns, or they're trying to do action in isolation. And we know that, if we can organize our actions, maybe we'll have greater impact, Anything else you want to say that you want, like, you were like, oh my God, like, I need to say that before Olivier wrap up?
Oh my God. I'm going to talk in so many other podcasts after that on the 3 different discussions and 3 panels. So I think I'm saying a lot already. I think I'm good. You're going to hear my voice a lot. And sometimes I feel like I talk a lot. I have a lot to say on these issues. I think I want people to hear what other people have to say in those discussions that the Chem Stories podcast is going to do. And I would say maybe just listen to all of it, because sometimes there's a subject we think that is less connected with our interest in the podcast, for example. But in all the different podcasts, people are also going to share their stories, not only around the theme, but it's going to be a different person with a different life and a different vision of chemsex. And even if there's the kind of a underground theme of the discussion, we get really to go inside everyone's life and experience. And I think this is the most precious thing of all. So I think, listen to all of it. That's what I would say.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm actually, after talking to you today, I think you made me like very excited to kind of hear the panel that you've hosted and actually all the episodes that are coming forward. And thank you again for the work that you've been doing outside of this project, but also inside of this project, just to trying to change our outlook, on chemsex. And I think this is extremely important. So thank you so much. It was so good to see you today, as always. And I think I'm looking forward to listening to your podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Olivier. It was great to have this chat with you. And thank you also for what you're doing for this project that is really becoming a huge part of the chemsex community, and very important because a lot of people have been able to share their stories. So thank you for what you did.
Attention all passengers, Captain Patrice here. Please prepare for landing. We're making our final descent on our YUL Solidarity flight. Next up, our journey continues on the YUL Creativity flight, where Montreal host Éric introduces experienced flyer Gabriel, a fashion designer, to share their story with chemsex. More compelling stories await. Subscribe to stay updated. If you've encountered turbulence while listening to this podcast, please refer to our list of resources and services related to PnP chemsex in the episode description and on chemstories.ca.